the writer, Lyle Vincent, the cinematographer, Joseph Cranes, the editor, and Lucy Mew. Thank you guys so much for being here and for sharing your wonderful film with us. I'm going to jump right into the Q&As. At the end, I would love to throw the questions back to you guys and get you guys involved with us over here. Marilyn, I'd love to start with you and the kind of inception of this story. It's based on harrowing true events. Can you talk us through what made you want to bring this story to the screen in your writing process?
So Irene and Joe's story came to me in 2019. I was pregnant with twin boys and felt unprepared to be a mother. So this story coming to me felt challenging. I felt excited. I also felt humbled that I'd been entrusted to try to adapt it. I live in San Gabriel. I lived there up until earlier this year when the Eden fire happened. So part of my process was going to the motel and sneaking into the room where this happened. I stood outside of Joe's clinic. I wanted to try and get a sense of how Irene may have felt as an outsider. And I went to Joe's high school. All of this because I think when you are adapting true events, you have to find a way to capture the spirit and events of these people, even if you don't know everything. So Eric and I did talk to some of Joe's classmates, and when we asked them about Irene and Joe, I think what we found was that they were very isolated, and they could only speak about them from a distance. So hopefully what this film does is bring you into their little world.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And it's fascinating to hear the journey this film went through before you guys actually were able to get it made. And of course, being based on real events, there's so much testimony that you guys were able to work off of. Eric, being with this project and sitting with it for so long, from the inception stages to actually directing it, were there any surprising things once you finally got to film the project that came about? Anything that was particularly easy or challenging about finally getting the story filmed and on the screen?
Everything was difficult, first of all. Easy, I don't know if anything is easy. What was maybe one of the fun surprises of how excited people were that San Gabriel Valley was going to be on screen. Like whenever we told crew or anybody we were shooting a story in San Gabriel Valley, they were all like, "Oh, amazing, yeah." And I went there, when I was a kid, we would go there every weekend buying groceries and go to restaurants. So I was really excited to be able to shoot there. Biggest challenge is we shot 17 days in New York in February for Los Angeles, and then we went out to LA for 4 days. Marrying the two cities was quite a challenge.
Amazing. This film deals so much with topics that aren't talked about enough, with the amazing weight of generational trauma and family history and the astounding relationships that are impacted by that within families and even outside of families. What does it mean to you to finally get this story out there and to have audiences interacting with it?
That's been the most sort of magical part about premiering here, was to be able to, it felt like showing it to audiences felt like completing the film. We made it for audiences. We wanted this to communicate to people, to reach out to people. Hopefully that connects, people connect to it. It's a film about connection and then reaching out and, not isolation, not shame, and openness. So being able to screen it and share it has been just this really incredible process, and just makes the film feel like it's, really out in the world.
Amazing, yeah, thank you for doing so with us. Lucy, you were both a producer and of course part of the cast, which means you got to help shape the story from both sides of the camera. How did you balance those two roles, and were there any ways that your two roles on the project influenced or impacted each other, especially when you're preparing for your role in front of the camera?
I think because I came on early, I was able to work with the script and the character and understand her a little bit, and also to shape her, just with her voice and the dialogue that I was familiar with, so that I could make her as authentic as possible and as rich as possible. And I worked with a wonderful dialect coach who we talked through every single line, and we translated not just the Chinese the way that I think that it would have been, because if you take the translation of English into Chinese, it's different. It's a poetry to the language, and to any language, frankly, and then to also subtitle the language to make it even more poetic. And I think I mentioned before that Quentin Tarantino, when I worked with him, and I first read Kill Bill, he said, I write better in subtitles than in English. You know, like it sounded so much better than when he had to just have somebody speak regular English. And then once we did that, we would then take the English and then break down the English so that it would make sense, you know, because the syntax and the grammar is different. So even if I said something like, I'm going to McDonald's, and I said it with an accent, it's not the same as if my mother would have said it. So we had to really change that. And I think Doug is here today. Doug, can you just raise your hand? Oh, there he is. Yes. Ironically, Doug is Caucasian, but anyway. He speaks multiple languages and is incredibly talented, and I've known him for so long, and he's just a very special human being. And he helped me create this character from the bottom up, and we just, you know, obviously Marilyn had written this incredible script, and then Eric worked on it with me. And then I worked with Doug, and we spent hours and days just trying to break it down to make it authentic. And it wasn't just, you know, Irene's lines, but how she interacted and collaborated with her son and what his lines would be. And some of it was Chinglish, so it was like mixed. And we wanted to make sure that that was authentic too, because, you know, how do we then, you know, do we translate it? Like, how do we do it so that the audience can understand it that doesn't speak Mandarin, obviously?
Certainly. Thank you so much for being here with us today and for sharing about the journey you went through with that. Lyle.
An incredible performance.
Joseph and Lyle, a big part of this film is, of course, the actual visual language that we get to see and the toning and pacing that impacts the narrative and the tension that we feel as we travel through the story with Irene and Joe. Cinematography and editing is particularly important in that. I would love for you guys to speak about how you built that visual language and how you translated the tone of the story through each of your respective roles.
Yeah, we wanted to have like a twofold part in the visuals, like a sense of heightened realism with the domestic scenes between them, where kind of the camera is just out of the way and we experience them, their performance. And the other approach was Joe's world and the subjective camera. We want that to be visceral and like you're in his head and you're in his world. And you know, we employed special lenses for that, special lighting, special look. Yeah, and then you want to speak more to that?
Sure. I mean, they shot it in such a way that it was fairly clear looking at the footage what was subjective from Joe's point of view and what was real life. And sometimes it was easy to just go from one to the other. But we found we had to sort of slowly introduce the idea. So in the school, it's more just audio. You know, you hear some whispers, and then he walks down the hallway in slow motion. Just beautiful, beautiful shot, but that's more subjective. But that's not really getting in his head yet. And then finally, once we go with him in those sessions, we had to find a way to bring us from sitting in that room into what's going on in his head, and that's where we got to start to incorporate more of that subjective footage that they were shooting. And I remember trying to figure out how to go from one to the other in that situation, because it felt like we needed to sort of slowly roll into it. And so I thought, oh, we'll do a dissolve. But that felt really soft and just didn't really communicate it. So that's when I started playing with those flashing edits, because it's like it needs to be sort of like it's forcing its way through. And so we played around with that a lot. And that was the beginning of the experiment of how we would deal with that stuff. We go into great detail about all of it, but basically I just did too much of it. Eric encouraged me, he's like, yeah, try it. And then we pulled it back. And then we pulled it back to hopefully a nice level. Yeah.
But I will say, like, that the descriptions of how those memories interrupt, like, his thought or his, you know, whatever he's experiencing is in the script. So it was something that, you know, Joe found and brought to the fore through editing, and I thought was amazing.
No, truly amazing, especially as we like slowly slip into Joe's eyes, because that's really what the story is about, like understanding and feeling, you know, this immense compassion for him as he navigates this really troubling time, and also then balancing that with compassion we feel for Irene as his mother and the weight of her cultural expectations. So at this time, I'd love to throw it to everyone in the audience. If anyone has a question, speak loud. Yes, over there.
And everybody else, I really enjoyed the movie. I thought there were a lot of themes captured in the movie, a lot of serious themes, which often, tend to ignore more connected we are with ourselves, in today's world. And so what I really liked about this movie was that it touched upon a lot of things which were very serious and real life. Can you talk to us a little bit about, as a team, while you were working on this project, how did you take care of your own mental health while dealing with such serious, unfortunate issues?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. It was interesting making this film. Actually created an openness on set. There were so many people on the crew who like would share stories about family members or friends who had, you know, struggling with mental illness, and it was almost like because they were working on the film, you know, it allowed us this license to share these stories. And I think in making the purpose of us making this film was to do that very thing, and it was amazing to see it on set and like that we were able to have this openness already, just because we were working on this story and share these things. So I felt like that created this sort of way of supporting each other and just like showing that, you know, it could be a space where people could discuss and share.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And of course, pointing out that in that question, thank you for sharing with us, is really important when talking about a film with topics like these. We have time for one more question at this time, if anyone would like.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for this film, and I'm actually a social worker and was in the nonprofit sector, and am now a city council member chairing the Mental Health Disabilities and Addictions Committee in New York. And this film highlighted so many issues that we're seeing in the community around stigma, language barriers, lack of cultural competency. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for highlighting this, but also as legislators who have to create these laws that are friendly to our communities. I was just curious if there were any thoughts or ideas you had in your conversations with the family and the friends, and would love to keep up dialogue if possible as well. So I just want to say thank you. But if you had any recommendations or anything you heard from the family, I'd love to.
Thank you. Thank you for your work, and thank you for your comments. I mean, I think it's ultimately about connection and openness. And you know, if people are shunned and stigmatized, they're not monitored, they're not being seen. No one knows and no one intervenes until they're at crisis, right? And it's how do we create enough of that sort of support around people. And you know, I talk about the New York Times article about On Track and Why, which is the sort of support network. And I think if people can imagine programs where people struggling with mental illness are able to, you know, sort of learn how to manage their symptoms and lead, you know, lives that they want to lead, you know, that's always super encouraging. So like my radar now, because working on this project, is up for those kinds of stories, you know. And anything we can do to support more of those, please let us know. I definitely want to be there.
Great. I just want to say one thing, because, you know, it's obviously a very heavy story, and I don't want everyone to leave with such a heavy heart. And I want to say that, you know, this mother's feeling of being sequestered or sequestering herself and her love for her son is really the main theme of this. And for us to create this, this love story, and to understand that she felt like this was her best option. And that is not something that we want for ourselves and for our community. And in our culture specifically, in many cultures, it's a feeling of shame and of it's just stress, they're fine. And I think if we can just talk about it and connect the dots a little bit, it helps to alleviate the spiral of it. It doesn't necessarily take away a diagnosis, but it can help to, give you outreach. And for her to feel like she didn't have trust for the system, that she felt that she was doing everything the school told her to do, she was doing what the doctor told her to do, and still she didn't quite understand, when she asks the doctor, then she's gonna get better. She does all these things, and the doctor gives her a response. She doesn't totally understand her. She says, okay, but she doesn't quite get it, but she's alone. And she continues to be alone, and it's hard because even her friend says, you sound like a foreigner, that he's going to a therapist, and let me just give you let me just mix up a concoction, a tincture. And by the way, the Chinese, the medicine has been around for 5,000 years, and it does work, but you have to mix both together. And I think even at the end, she calls the police. She's doing the right thing by what she thinks she needs to do, but she's missing so much. And I know that my parents miss so much. And I think that, they obviously came from another country. I'm first generation, but even second, third generation, it still goes on. So the conversation has to begin, and, instead of seeing this as a monstrous act, she did it from a loving place. And that is heartbreaking. And we want this to be a win for us, for the audience to take home, so they don't, if they feel something doesn't feel right, and it's really hard to say it, just try. The other option is so much worse. That's all I say.
No, amazing. Thank you for sharing. Eric, Lyle, Marilyn, Joseph, and Lucy, thank you for being here today. Thank you for making this wonderful film and for sharing it with us. We would like to thank you guys for attending this screening, and we would like to wish you guys a good evening. Thank you guys again.
Thank you, everyone.